The air is thick with smoke. The sound of chains scraping against stone echoes in the darkness. In the corner of a cold chamber, a cage hangs, its iron bars biting into the flesh of the condemned. He whispers a final prayer, but the world outside doesn't hear it. This was the Inquisition's message. Heresy would not just be punished. It would be silenced, displayed, and remembered in terror. Tonight we step into the iron cages where heretics took their last breath. The year is 1480. Across the cobbled streets of Europe, whispers travel faster than the wind. A merchant is seen avoiding mass. A scholar speaks too freely about scripture. A peasant dares to question the word of a priest. To us, they may seem like small acts of doubt or independence, but in this age they carried the weight of treason. For in 15th century Europe, religion was not just belief, it was law, identity, and power. To step outside its boundaries was to put your life on trial. The Catholic Church, feeling its authority challenged by growing dissent, sanctioned a brutal institution, the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Its purpose was simple on parchment yet horrifying in practice: root out heresy and cleanse the faithful through fear. In town squares, the mere word heretic was enough to turn neighbors into informants. Anyone could be accused, and accusations rarely required proof. A farmer who missed confession, a widow who read the Bible in secret, a healer who relied on herbs instead of prayers, all could be branded enemies of the faith. Imagine the atmosphere: bells tolling across a gray sky, smoke from church incense clinging to the air, villagers lowering their voices when an official cloaked in black passed by. The Inquisition thrived not only on evidence but on silence. The fear of being overheard was enough to keep communities quiet, docile, and suspicious of one another. Inside stone chambers lined with crucifixes and flickering candles, inquisitors wrote long records of names and suspicions. The language was formal, even holy, but its outcome was anything but divine. A mere whisper of doubt recorded in those books could drag a soul from their home into the abyss of the inquisitorial process. For those accused, the journey began with isolation. Their homes raided, possessions seized, families left behind in shame. And as they were led through the streets, shackled and pale, the crowd often looked away, not out of mercy, but fear that a glance of sympathy might bind them to the same fate. The Inquisition was not just about faith. It was about control. Heresy was painted as a spiritual disease, but in truth it was also a political crime. Dissent weakened authority. Questioning the church meant questioning the very order of society. And so in the name of God, cages were prepared, confessions were demanded, and the machinery of silence turned ever forward. It often began with a whisper. A merchant refusing to sell his best wine to a priest, a scholar asking too many questions during a sermon, a midwife delivering a child with herbs instead of prayers. Suspicion could be born from envy, rivalry, or a simple grudge. In the charged atmosphere of the 15th century, personal quarrels became mortal dangers, because an accusation of heresy was not just gossip. It was a sentence waiting to be carried out. The Inquisition's greatest weapon was secrecy. The accused rarely knew who had spoken against them. Neighbors, friends, even family members could turn informant, either out of fear or for the promise of favor. In many towns, inquisitors established wooden confession boxes in which citizens could drop anonymous notes. The words written on those scraps of parchment carried more weight than the cries of the accused. And once a name was whispered into the records, the process moved with a chilling inevitability. Picture it: a quiet night interrupted by the pounding of fists on a wooden door. Torches flicker outside, shadows stretch across the walls, and a family stirs in panic. The inquisitors stand at the threshold, cloaked, expressionless, reading a charge aloud in Latin that the accused barely understands. Behind them, soldiers wait with shackles. A wife clutches her children. A husband swears innocence, but innocence has no place here. With chains clamped around their wrists, they are led away, the silence of neighbors watching from shuttered windows heavier than any words. Once seized, the accused is stripped of dignity. Their possessions are inventoried and confiscated, often never returned, leaving families destitute. Their names are entered into the Inquisition's ledger, a book of suspicion where guilt is assumed and truth is twisted into confession. Alone in a cold cell, the accused has no lawyer, no advocate, no chance to confront the shadowy voices that condemn them. The only path forward is submission, The accusation was more than the beginning of a trial. It was the first tightening of the iron cage around their life. The weight of rumor became a sentence. The absence of defense became proof, and every plea of innocence echoed unanswered against stone walls. The accused was no longer a neighbor or a scholar or a healer. They were now branded a heretic, a danger to the faith and a spectacle waiting to be made. The chamber is dim, lit by a handful of wax candles that drip slowly onto the stone floor. The air smells of damp and incense, a mix designed to remind the accused of both the church and the grave. At the center sits a long wooden table, where inquisitors in dark robes arrange parchment, quills, and heavy books of law and scripture. At the far end, shackled to a chair, sits the accused. Their eyes are sunken from days of isolation, lips cracked from thirst. This is not the trial, it is the interrogation, and it is where the Inquisition's grip truly tightens. The process begins with words, not weapons. Inquisitors ask carefully crafted questions, their tones calm, even courteous. But each question is a trap. Do you believe the Church holds the only truth? Do you deny the authority of Rome? Who else shares your doubts? The accused hesitates, fearing that honesty will condemn them, but also knowing that silence will be marked as resistance. Every answer is written down in neat script, evidence twisted into confession. Days often pass in this limbo. The accused is left in the cold, their cell a place of hunger and dread, then brought back again before the tribunal. Exhaustion becomes its own form of torture. Some break under the sheer weight of time, their minds unraveling until they confess to crimes they never committed. Others cling to their faith or their innocence, unaware that both paths end at the same place. When words fail, the tone shifts. The inquisitors remind the accused of what awaits those who persist in denial. They speak of mercy, of salvation, but always with an edge. Mercy in their hands means submission, and when persuasion falters, the instruments of fear are revealed. Chains rattle as a hooded attendant wheels in the tools. Ropes for binding limbs. The strappado to wrench joints from sockets, and the cage itself, small, iron and suffocating, placed just within sight. The message is clear. The body can be broken until the soul agrees, the accused begs. Some cry out for God, others for their families, but the chamber remains cold. Inquisitors see themselves not as tormentors, but as surgeons cutting away a disease. Each scream, each desperate denial is seen as a step toward cleansing, and as the questioning continues, the truth becomes irrelevant. What matters is conformity, silence, and the tightening hold of the Inquisition's iron will. The sentence, when finally spoken, is almost ritual. The inquisitors read it aloud in Latin, voices echoing off the stone walls as if the building itself approves. The accused, already broken by interrogation, hears the words but hardly comprehends them, until the object of their doom is revealed. Brought forth by attendants creaking and rusting is the cage. It is deceptively simple, a frame of iron bars forged in the shape of a human body. Too small for comfort, too rigid for escape. Some are designed to hold a man upright, arms pinned to his sides, unable to sit or lie down. Others dangle from chains, suspending the condemned above the earth, swaying in the wind like grim lanterns. The very sight of it is enough to drain the last strength from the accused. The ritual begins with stripping away humanity. Clothes are torn from the body, leaving only rags to cover skin that will soon blister in sun or freeze in night air. Shackles are replaced with the bars of the cage, every limb pressed against cold iron until the door slams shut. The sound reverberates, a final metallic seal between life and death. Once caged, the condemned is carried to a public space, a church courtyard, a town square, or the gates of the city. Suspended high or mounted on poles, they are placed in full view of the community. This was not an execution in secret, it was theater. The Inquisition wanted not only to punish, but to terrify. The hours turn into days. The body weakens as thirst dries the throat and hunger gnaws the stomach. Muscles cramp against the unyielding bars. In summer, the sun beats down, roasting the prisoner alive. In winter, winds whip through the cage, flesh stiffening under frost. Birds circle above, sometimes landing to peck at exposed skin. Villagers pass by, crossing themselves quickly, their eyes filled with fear, not compassion. To pity the condemned was to invite suspicion. The cage was not swift like fire, nor final like the sword. It was a drawn-out lesson. Each rattle of the chains in the night, each groan of rusted iron in the wind, reminded the town of the cost of dissent. The victims' suffering became a sermon, their silence a warning, and as their voice faded to nothing, the iron cage did what it was designed to do: turn one person's death into a weapon of fear for many. Morning breaks, and with it, the spectacle begins. The cage dangling from its chain is no longer just a prison, it is a stage. In the town square, where markets once bustled with laughter and barter, silence hangs heavy. Merchants lower their voices, children are hushed, and villagers gather in tight clusters, afraid to stand too close, yet compelled to look. The condemned, gaunt and pale, hangs suspended above them. Eyes once full of resistance now burn with fever and despair. Every cough, every groan, every rattling movement of the cage is heard by the crowd. The church has placed the body not in shadow but in light, where suffering can be seen by all. This was no accident. The Inquisition understood power. Fear is most potent when it is public, and so cages were raised before cathedrals or set along roads where travelers passed. The condemned became a living sermon, a warning cast in iron and flesh. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering prayers that their families would never fall under suspicion. Farmers crossed themselves as they led their carts past the swinging figure, eyes fixed on the ground, afraid that even pity might betray them. Priests sometimes gathered crowds, preaching sermons beneath the swaying cages. "See here," they declared, "the fate of those who defy the truth. Let this torment cleanse your souls and remind you of God's justice." The words rang holy, but the image above them was anything but divine. Skin blistered under sun, lips cracked from thirst, ribs sharp against iron bars. A human life reduced to a spectacle of warning. The marketplace adapted around it. Bread was sold, goods exchanged, but always under the shadow of the cage. The condemned's cries mingled with the sounds of trade until suffering became part of daily life. Over time, voices grew weaker and silence replaced their moans. Yet the silence was not peace, it was terror etched into memory. When death finally came, it was slow, almost unnoticed. A head drooped forward, a body sagged lifeless against the bars. Crows circled and descended, their wings black against the morning sky. Still the cage remained. Sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, the corpse was left to rot in plain view, a grotesque reminder that the Inquisition's reach was not bound by time. And so, the cage became more than an execution. It was a monument of fear. Every passerby carried its image home, whispering of the suffering they had seen, warning others never to question, never to doubt. In this way, the Inquisition did not just punish the condemned, it ruled the living. Night falls and the square is empty. The bustling noise of the day has faded, leaving only the creak of wood, the groan of iron, and the whisper of wind. The condemned sways gently in the cage, body pressed tightly against cold bars, skin rubbed raw where metal has bitten into flesh. The hunger is sharp, but it is thirst that torments most. The tongue swollen, lips cracked, every swallow like sandpaper. The world narrows to one desperate need: water, yet no water comes. Only the sound of chains clinking with each faint movement. The prisoner's voice, once hoarse from crying, now drifts into whispers. Snatches of prayers, fragments of memories, a child's name, a plea for forgiveness. Sometimes curses too, spat into the night at the men who condemned them. But even curses fade into silence as the body weakens. Above, the stars scatter cold light over the scene. Crows perch on rooftops watching. The night air cuts deep, chilling the bones. Every shallow breath becomes visible in the frost, as though the soul itself is escaping in fragments. Hours stretch into an eternity. Time is measured not by clocks, but by heartbeats that grow slower, weaker until they barely stir the chest. The final moments are cruelly intimate. The condemned feels the weight of the cage pressing in, iron against skin, ribs heaving painfully for air that will not satisfy. The mind drifts between waking and delirium. Faces of loved ones flicker in memory, mingled with visions of fire, saints, or demons. Each gasp could be the last, and the terror lies not in death itself, but in the unbearable slowness of its approach. And then, it comes. A shudder of the chest, a final groan, the head tilting forward, eyes half open but unseeing. The body slumps against the bars, still bound by iron but free at last from breath. The cage, once alive with struggle, falls silent. Only the wind moves it now, creaking softly in the darkness. But even in death, the prisoner's torment is not over. The body remains suspended, left for the world to see. In the morning, villagers will pass beneath, whispering prayers, averting their gaze. Children will tug at their mother's hands, asking questions that go unanswered. The Inquisition ensures that death itself becomes a sermon, that even the last breath of one condemned soul continues to echo in the minds of the living. The cage was never just iron, it was memory. Long after the condemned had breathed their last, long after bones had turned brittle and dropped into dust, the image of that swaying prison lingered in the minds of those who lived beneath its shadow. In towns and villages across Europe, the story spread faster than fire, of men left to rot in cages, of women who cried out until their voices broke, of children who watched their parents die suspended above the streets they once walked together. The legacy was silence. Families who had seen loved ones taken learned to guard their tongues. Scholars wrote less boldly, merchants conducted business more cautiously, and priests' sermons were met with unquestioning nods. The Inquisition had not only punished heretics, it had reshaped society into one of fear. In a world where a rumor could become a death sentence, suspicion replaced trust. Neighbors eyed one another warily. Friendships dissolved and communities fractured under the weight of paranoia. The cages themselves stood as monuments. Rusted frames hung long after their victims were gone, skeletal reminders against stone walls or city gates. They became part of the landscape, grim as any church steeple. Travelers passing through whispered their horror, carrying tales to other towns, spreading the Inquisition's power far beyond its courts. A cage in one city was enough to silence 100 in the next, and yet, behind the terror lay control. The Church and its inquisitors believed themselves guardians of faith, protectors of divine order. But in truth, the iron cages revealed the machinery of power, fear as a weapon, death as a spectacle, suffering as a tool to shape obedience. To defy was not only to risk death, but to risk becoming a message, a living sermon of pain displayed before all. Centuries later, these cages remain symbols of humanity's darker chapters. Museums hold their rusted bones, historians write of their use, and tourists shiver as they imagine the lives once crushed inside. They are relics, yes, but they are also warnings. They remind us that when power cloaks itself in righteousness, when dissent is silenced through terror, the result is not faith, it is submission. The last breath of those condemned did not vanish into the air. It lingers still, carried through generations as a whisper in history's ear. And though the cages are empty now, their shadows remain, stretching across time to remind us of a truth carved in iron. Fear can rule a people more effectively than faith. The cages are gone, the victims silent, but their last breaths echo through history. The Inquisition ruled with fear, not faith, turning human suffering into a warning. Today, these iron prisons remain symbols of control, cruelty, and the cost of dissent. Their shadows remind us, true power does not demand silence, and true faith does not need fear.